Okay. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to day 2 of the general sessions of the public hearing for the Marathon Palladium project. My name is Deborah Sikora, and I'm the chair of the joint panel review. My colleagues on the panel are Gay Drescher to my right and Laurie Bruce to my left. I won't be going through and repeating my full opening remarks from yesterday, as they can be found on the transcript for day 1 and on YouTube. I will, however, take a few moments this morning to summarize a few housekeeping items that you may find helpful as we proceed through the day. Live audio and video streams and video recordings of this hearing are available to the public through YouTube. Anyone in the virtual hearing room with their camera or microphones turned on will be captured, and images and recording of you and your surroundings will be broadcast to a publicly available YouTube video. If you do have concerns about this, please contact the Secretariat well in advance of the time you're scheduled to participate to explain your concerns. We'll do our best to accommodate any concerns while considering the need to conduct an open and transparent public process. The Secretariat will be able to assist you with logistical or process-related questions that you might have, and they can be reached by writing to the project email address, which can be found on the public registry, and this will be monitored throughout the hearing. I think we found this very helpful yesterday. We had some audio questions, so I think it worked very well. In the event of a medical or other emergency or an alarm where you are located, please consider your safety first, exit your location if necessary, and when it's safe to do so, please let us know how we can assist, and we'll find time to reschedule if you were in the middle of a presentation. Also, we'd request that you turn off the ringer on your cell phone and any other devices you have with you. The agenda for today is available on the Marathon section of the public registry as document 1066. We did post a slightly amended hearing schedule yesterday for today's proceedings, so you can access it there. Our plan is to take a quick 15-minute break this morning, and then we'll sit until approximately noon with a 1-hour lunch break. We do plan to have one break in the afternoon as needed, and this may change depending on how the day proceeds, in which case we'll adjust accordingly. So before I begin for the day, I wonder if there are any questions or procedural matters that require addressing before we begin. All good? Okay. So just a few things for our participants today. Please remember to state your name and to speak clearly and concisely for the court reporter, who will be keeping an official transcript of our proceedings. As some of you may know, at yesterday's proceedings, Generation PGM gave opening remarks and a presentation on their proposed project. For those who were not in attendance yesterday, and as Generation PGM is not giving that presentation this morning, I would ask if you have any question to pose to the company on the information they shared, you may do so now. Good. Okay. I will now call on our first presenter then today. And with us is the town of Marathon. So I will invite you to please turn on your video, unmute, and you may begin your presentation. And please let us know when you would like us to advance your slides. And once again, thank you so much to everyone for joining us today, and look forward to the proceedings.
Good morning, Madam Chair and panel members. Mayor Rick Dumas, Town of Marathon.
Good morning.
Good morning. With me this morning is our CEO, Daryl Skorczynski, and Daryl will be running through the presentation on behalf of the Town of Marathon. Let me take the opportunity to recognize that we live and work and play on the unceded lands, traditional lands of the Beattygon-Anishinaabe First Nations community next door to us. We have a great relationship with Beattygon-Anishinaabe, and we look forward to future opportunities economically, as well as community relationship building. Let me tell you a bit about myself. I was born and raised in Marathon, grew up in Heron Bay, just north of Bitigani First Nations community, as well as working and living in Marathon the majority of my adult life. Took a little bit of a break in the early 80s, but came back and then got involved in business. Then decided to run for council. Been on council since 1991 and mayor of Marathon since 2006. Marathon has been always a resource-based community, very successful. We've recognized ourselves as the hub of the North Shore, and we take a great pride in the fact that we look forward to opportunities in the future in a resource-based community. We know that the importance of mining as well as forestry in our community is vital for not only Marathon, but the entire region. So with that being said, I want to take the opportunity to pass on to Daryl the opportunity to introduce himself and go through our presentation this morning. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mayor Dumas. Daryl Skwarczynski, Chief Administrative Officer and Clerk for the Town of Marathon, for the record. Like Mayor Dumas, I was born and raised in Marathon, and I've had the opportunity to return now and be in the CAO role for the better part of 10 years now. So very much appreciate the opportunity to present today, address the panel, as well as provide the Town of Marathon's perspective on the project through this hearing. So I'll take you through the presentation. Thank you very much. Next slide, please. So we want to build Marathon together. Marathon is known as a progressive, action-oriented community, and our reputation is that of change makers. We want to create the future by being sustainability leaders in the emerging low-carbon economy. Next slide, please. Marathon has a deep mining history that's shown through our relationship with the Hemlo Goldfield over approximately the last 37 years. We've had great partners in the number of companies that have been on that site, including Barrick Gold at the present time. And we do believe that this project can lead the way in terms of a green future. We believe in that vision that generation has provided, that green is the new gold. We know that copper and platinum group metals are listed as critical metals, and that PGMs and carbon and copper are integral metals to develop a low carbon technology and for Canada to be a world leader in that front. 21st century metals, including palladium, copper, and platinum, will help drive the age of electric vehicles and hybrids. We can be world leaders here on the North Shore of Lake Superior. Let's take on that challenge collectively. Next slide, please. This project will create jobs, training, and education, not only for Marathon and our neighbors in Beektagong First Nation, but everybody along the North Shore, including those located in Thunder Bay. We know that 1,100 jobs will be generated during construction. The project will create close to 400 permanent jobs in the region that has struggled economically in the last decade, and even more so during the pandemic. Job creation will extend far beyond just mining extraction and processing jobs and include construction, environmental management and sciences, transportation, energy, equipment services, management and consulting, food services, and accommodations. So we know by spinoff, this will likely create another 1,000 jobs, or they're similar to that number in the regional economy. Marathon in Northwestern Ontario has the capacity to train workers for this mining project with assets like Confederation College, ready and willing to get to work right here in Marathon. And it's a plan that 80 to 90% of the operational workforce will be hired within the local labor pool, which will include the region. Next slide, please. Economic development and economic spin-offs from this project are measurable. According to the Ontario Mining Association, 90% of Ontario's gross domestic product stays in Ontario. 38% of mine spending occurs locally, and the average weekly wage is 67% higher than the average industrial wage in the province. $1.5 million in property taxes per year to the town of Marathon can be reinvested for community and economic development. New mines drive development along the production and supply chain, which increases wealth, productivity, and wages in many other industries locally and regionally. Next slide, please. The Marathon Palladium project will support social and community development. Marathon is an active hub community supporting neighboring regional communities and our First Nation partners with healthcare, sports and recreation, commercial and shopping, and other socioeconomic necessity. What benefits Marathon benefits all. The project will be an asset in attracting and retaining a younger workforce to communities with aging demographics. We know that a larger population will lead to socioeconomic benefits to each community that will generate spin-offs from this project. The project will ensure economic and social sustainability for our grandchildren and future generations. Modern mining companies contribute locally to social and community development programs. Generation Mining has already shown their willingness to support the local community through organizations like Miner Hockey and the local food bank. Next slide. Generation Mining has been a collaborative and respectful project developer with the town of Marathon, working to accommodate our concerns and interests through this process on a timely basis over the last number of years. Over 15 years of consultation and engagement efforts and input from First Nations and Indigenous communities, the public at large, and regulators have taken place to date. We are working with Generation Mining, as we do with other partners, to sustain the environment in Marathon that supports a healthy quality of life, one which we're known for along the North Shore. Our ultimate responsibility as the corporation of the town of Marathon is to support projects that benefit Marathon and that are in the best interests of our residents. Next slide, please. Marathon is known as a prosperous, resource-based community with a strong economy, an excellent quality of life, a rich history in the natural resources sector, which includes both forestry and mining, and progressive leadership. Generation Mining's project represents a significant economic opportunity for Marathon, our First Nation neighbors and partners, the region, local communities, business and industry, while making a meaningful contribution to Canada's low carbon future. Let us not be afraid of this opportunity ahead of us. Let's embrace it. We believe the time for this project is now. And with that, I'd like to thank the panel, and I'll turn it back over to Mayor Dumas for closing remarks on behalf of the town of Marathon.
Great. Thanks a lot, Daryl, for that great presentation. And as the panel can recognize the importance of the natural resource sector based in Marathon. We were born out of the fiber industry with pulp and paper in 1940s. And Marathon's logo, as you can see, Marathon built on paper, laced with gold. Now we kind of joke because we're now going to the fiber age. So Marathon built on paper, laced with gold and fiber. Marathon has a great relationship with Barrick Hemlo, as well as now with Generation Mining. As Daryl indicated, we've had a great relationship over the last 15 years with all the proponents that are looking at the site right back to Marathon PGM. This project has history within our community of some 40 to 50 years, with Anaconda back in 1960s looking at this site. So this is a well-known site in our community and has been very well explored. And we think there's great opportunities in the future for the natural resources basis for our community to succeed, and not only to Marathon, but of course the whole region, as Daryl indicated. We respect the mutually beneficial partnerships with BN, and which includes our joint ventures, and look forward to the involvement in the opportunities that it brings. As you noted in the presentation, we are the healthcare center for the region, the hub. With also that comes with the commercial and recreational aspects. Without opportunities economically, our community will suffer. Then, of course, the region will suffer with that taken in consideration. We are known for our innovative project development and progressive leadership as the hub. And as indicated in our presentation, I started off at my onset of my scenario. Marathon is a leader, and we are recognized throughout the region and the North Shore as a hub and a leader within that hub. So we take great pride in that with our council and our administrative team. We have a great working relationship together, and we want to continue that with not only Marathon and the residents, but of course with the region, and be that leader. Marathon has been here long before the project and hearing that has started yesterday. And recognizing that we are a resource-based community, we will also be here long after this. Our duty and responsibility to our residents to do what is best in their best interest. That is why we strongly support this project. And we believe that Generation PGM will be a great corporate citizen as long as we can see this project going forward, and we see the opportunities for our community and the future of our community for many, many years to come. The opportunities for our children and our grandchildren are great, and want to make Marathon a strong and vibrant place to live. I take the opportunity to thank the panel this morning and look forward to the rest of the hearings over the next month, and look forward to a positive outcome for this project for Marathon and region. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mayor Dumas and Mr. Swarczynski, for the presentation to the panel today. I'd like to open it up, if you're good right now, to any questions of participants who are registered today. If there are any questions for the town of Marathon on their presentation. Seeing none, maybe I'll ask if my panel members have any questions at this point. Ms. Bruce?
Thank you. I'll leave this to Mr. or Mayor Dumas if you want to answer it, or if you want to direct it to your colleague. Reference was made to Confederation College as a potential training partner. My words, not quite your words. Have there been explicit discussions in this regard up to this point?
So I'll touch on it a bit, and I'll pass over to Mr. Swarczynski. Back in the 2010 era, Marathon worked closely with Marathon PGM and the Confederation College Group at the time, and looking at building a actual center of excellence here for training and mining. So we've had those ongoing discussions, and to date, there are more opportunities that we see going forward with training and opportunities for our youth to go into the mining sector, working through our high school as well as Confederation College. And I'll let Daryl touch a bit on that, because he has much more involvement with the college as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Your Worship, and thank you for the question. The short answer is yes. As recently as last week, I met with the college and the president. And for the record, I'm also the chair of the Board of Governors for Confederation College, just so that's noted. And I met with the president and the senior team to not only talk about the Marathon PGM project, but the number of mining projects such as Greenstone Gold that are taking place in the region, and the need to develop a comprehensive strategy around workforce development, housing solutions, and other initiatives. So it's an ongoing conversation that I expect will ramp up as this process and this project ramps up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Drescher, do you have, no? Good, thank you. Generation PGM, any questions for?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just give me a moment. I'll just confirm a few questions and just come back. It'll just take me a moment. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have no questions.
Okay.
And I would like to thank Mayor Dumas and Daryl Swarczynski for their presentation. And Mr. Amwell will have a formal thank you at the end. Thank you.
Well, I'd very much like to thank you again for taking the time to be part of the hearing this morning. Thanks to Mayor Dumas and Mr. Swarczynski. We really appreciate your time today, and thank you again.
So, Madam Chair, if you don't mind, Marathon has always been a very open and accessible community, and I encourage anybody who is participating in the panel process in the hearings over the next 30 days to reach out to both myself and Mr. Swarczynski. We're willing to answer any question you might have or pose any concern you might have in regards to the process going forward and Marathon support. We represent, as I stated, the residents of our community, and we hope that we also recognize the importance of this for the region. And we're always there to make sure that we're totally accessible to all residents as well as regional partners. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I think our next presenter is from Northwatch, and I would ask you to unmute, turn on your camera, and we'll turn over the floor to your presentation. Just a couple of reminders: if you need us to advance your slides, let us know. And if you could speak clearly, slowly for the court reporter, that would be great. So I'll turn it over to Northwatch now.
Yes, thank you and good morning. My name is Brene Lloyd and I'm speaking for Northwatch this morning. I do believe the Secretariat has our slides in bank, and if they could bring them to screen and advance them, that would be, I think that was their preferred arrangement.
Sounds good. Are we okay with presentation?
Great, thank you very much and good morning. I'm joining from the Nipissing Territory, Territory of Nipissing First Nation in the Robinson-Huron Treaty Area. Northwatch is a regional coalition in northeastern Ontario, so our members and our interests encompass the lands of Robinson-Huron, Robinson-Superior Treaty areas, the southern reaches of Anishinaabe Nation, the unceded Algonquin territories in the Lake Temiskaming, Ottawa, Outaouais valleys. So thank you for your time this morning. Northwatch, I'll just go straight into it. I think we don't have that much time. Northwatch is our regional coalition, and our mandate, our objective is to serve as a regional representative voice on environmental concerns and to support public participation in environmental decision-making. And we've been engaged in the review of the Marathon mine since its beginning, and we're active participants in phase 1, phase 2, and now after some delay, phase 3. Neither our written submission or our presentation today are comprehensive. And nothing that we are going to say today is startling. We expect our observations are shared by most, if not all, whether they're enthusiastic supporters for the project or tend to the more critical end of the continuum. Our purpose in intervening in this review is to contribute to the review process, to improve the project as an implementation, should it ever move to operational stage, should it receive an environmental assessment approval, the necessary permits, and should it demonstrate that it has the financial viability that it would actually move to the operational stage. Next slide, please. So the key issues we're going to speak to very briefly today, which we touched on in our written submission, include the project purpose, workforce accommodations as one example of the offsite infrastructure issues, cumulative effects, climate, alternative means, and we again are looking at one example of that, aquatic impacts, and we'll speak briefly to review challenges. Next slide, please. So just as a general context, Northwatch, we have participated in a number of different mining reviews, and we look at projects through a particular lens. We ask the questions, will the mine project, if it's in an area with past or active mines, will it contribute to the remediation of past mining impacts, of which we have many across the Northern Ontario landscape? Will the mine project maximize economic and social benefits to local communities, especially communities that are previously mine dependent? Will the mine assessment be carried out in a way that adequately identifies the ecological values in the project area and adequately assesses the degree to and the manner in which the proposed mining related activities will impact on those ecological values? Will the mining activities be carried out in a manner that avoids environmental harm? Will the mine project avoid adversely impacting recreational opportunities and pastimes, social benefits that we gain from the landscape? Will it avoid impacting those other opportunities or values? Will the mine project be carried out in a manner that respects and preserves the rights, the land uses, and the interests of Indigenous peoples? So that's the lens, and we haven't applied that lens at this point. We intend to apply that lens in our final comments to you. We want to listen to other participants, listen more to Generation Mining's explanation and description of their project, and we will apply that lens as part of our final comments. Next slide, please. So the purpose of the project, Generation Mining took a tack that many other private sector proponents have taken, arguing that the only purpose they need to describe is the business interest. We're not fully persuaded of that. We do know that other proponents have used that tack and they have been permitted to do so. But according to the Act, the environmental assessment of a designated project must take into account the following factors, and F is the purpose of the designated project. It doesn't set out that limitation or constraint or bypass of discussing the purpose of the project. And in our view, the purpose of the project description in the EIS should be much more holistic and much more in the social interest, rather than specifically and so limited to the business interest. And I think that the purposes of the Act itself give further direction to that. The purposes of the Act itself are to protect the environment, meaningful public participation, application of the precautionary principle, in that it sets out that activities are to be undertaken in a precautionary manner. So we're not persuaded by this limitation to just business interests. In the case of Generation Mining, they described it in terms of the benefits of palladium socially in meeting our greenhouse gas reductions and so on, talking about it as part of the green economy, which it is an essential element for many current and emerging technologies that will assist us in moving to renewable energy and meeting energy efficiencies. But I felt during Generation Mining implied that the benefits of that palladium and making palladium available, it implied that it was a Canadian benefit. But in fact, there's no commitment to that. In fact, there's no commitment to processing the product domestically. I think this is spoken to in a really limited way in the EIS, a little bit more detail in the feasibility study. And the feasibility study, I think, establishes that they're quite equally looking at a domestic market or an international market, and that will be price driven. So I think even the purpose being provision of palladium and all the benefits of palladium is very limited in terms of Generation Mining's presentation. But I was struck by their presenting copper as part of the purpose, and that they presented copper and a short supply, impending short supply of copper as being part of the project purpose, and so their project rationale. And we have been looking at copper for a very different purpose recently, and so followed up on that and found that this simply, it wasn't supported in their evidence, in their environmental impact statement. Overall, the environmental impact statement tends to lack references, footnotes, supporting evidence, supporting documentation. And this was certainly one example. When we followed up, we went first to Natural Resources Canada, should be a reliable authority. And Natural Resources Canada information on copper indicates no short supply on the near horizon. And we did a quick online investigation looking at some of the very regular business sources and found that Reuters and Bloomberg, two industry writers, market followers, had directly contradicting analysis. One said looming supply gap, and the other said a significant surplus supply, both in the early 2020s. So we're, not only unpersuaded that the business purpose is limited to the purpose description is limited to business interests, but we're unpersuaded by the business interests that Generation Mining put forward. Next slide, please. So again, we chose just one example when we looked at offsite infrastructure. We looked at the example of workforce accommodation, and we found that there were, varied descriptions of this, but fairly consistently, there was no commitment to workforce accommodations. There was some generally stated expectation that some unnamed third party would be the provider of this service. There were, various descriptions. In one section in the addendum, it stated that offsite support infrastructure may or not be proposed as part of this project. And then it went on to talk in detail about the description. The complex is anticipated as a pre-engineered wood frame 2-story structure comprised of individual modular units, shared bathrooms, a surprising amount of detail for it may or may not happen part of the offsite infrastructure to which Generation Mining has made no commitment and expects some third party to provide. And we offer that just as an example of the the inconsistencies and the lack of supporting information throughout the EIS. But one significant area of discussion we found missing was the impact of out-of-town workforces, and particularly when you have accommodation complexes, the potential impact for them on women. There was no gender analysis that we found throughout the documents, and there was no even recognition, even passing recognition of the impacts of out-of-region, out-of-town concentrated workforces on women, and including in particular on Indigenous women. And this was a significant finding in the Missing, Murdered, and Indigenous Women's report. They heard a testimony that the presence of man camps is an absolute factor in the tragic phenomena of missing and murdered Indigenous women. And I found that a really very grievous absence from the examination by Generation Mining. Next slide, please. So in terms of cumulative effects, we found we would commend to the panel the work done by Sarah Liebman on behalf of Environment North, and we would make just 3 additional comments. One is we think that the processing of concentrates should be part of the project description and certainly part of the examination of cumulative effects. We think that transportation should very definitely be part of the cumulative effects study. And I'll just note, I was struck yesterday by a comment by Generation Mining, a reference to the port. We found no description of a port in the environmental impact statement. Again, when we look to the feasibility study, there's a brief description of the possibility of using a port. But the cumulative, in terms of even describing cumulative effects, it's difficult when the transportation options, which should be included, are as undefined as they are in the environmental impact statement. It could be truck, it could be by rail, it could be by CN or by CP if it's rail. And according to the feasibility study and a passing remark by Generation Mining yesterday, it could also go by water. So the third comment, the last comment I would make on cumulative effects, we found that there was no analysis of ecological themes. There was some acknowledgement of lack of loss of forest cover, but there was no analysis of ecological themes such as forest fragmentation and the effects of forest fragmentation on flora and fauna, including mortality, breeding, and abundance effects. And that phenomena of forest fragmentation applies not only to the clearing for the site, but also for the transmission line and potentially also for transportation purposes. And that we found to be wholly absent. Next slide, please. In terms of climate, again, we would encourage you to rely on these submissions by Carrie Blaze on behalf of Environment North. But we would quarrel with the conclusions that Generation Mining reached on this. They made a conclusion that the emissions are not significant. That's not supported by climate science. The statement that reversibility is high was just perplexing to us. And they included an observation that there is a high ecological social value associated associated with the reduction of greenhouse gases, but we found that conflicted directly with the earlier dismissal of emissions not being significant. And I would say that just using one measure to look at their greenhouse gas emissions, I would say that they are significant. We did a very quick calculation. When we look at their, just use a jobs per kilogram ratio, I'd suggest this. Their job estimates, if you do it on a 300 job or a 500 job estimate, the Canadian, as cited by Generation Mining, their contribution to Canadian CO2 emissions would be only 0.01 for the project. 0.01, that's for the entire domestic greenhouse gas emissions. But when you calculate that, and again, this is just one single lens, but if you're looking at benefit versus impact, the jobs benefit, if you calculate it on 300 jobs, we have 1,943.43 million Canadians in the workforce in 2022. On a 300 job basis, you've got 4 zeros instead of 1 0. You've got it's 0.000015444. That's the Canadian contribution compared, or that's Gen Mine's contribution to the workforce compared to a 0.01 contribution to greenhouse gas emissions. And if we did it on a 500 job, being very optimistic, a 500 job estimate is still 4 zeros, 0.000257334. That's the contribution of jobs compared to a 0.01 contribution of greenhouse gas emissions. I consider the greenhouse gas emissions to be high on a per job, on a per unit, on a per project basis. So I realize I'm going over my time, so I'm going to try to really speed up. Next slide, please. I'll just say in terms of the alternative means assessment, we used just one example. We looked at the assessment of power supply. And we found that, again, this was an unsupported set of statements. We questioned why the availability of a connection point in the Marathon transformer station is still unknown at this stage. The document states that there's more flexibility to identify appropriate connections in option 1 than in option 2, but it provides no basis for that. They identify the benefit of a straighter corridor in one of their options, their preferred option, but again, they leave out the other impacts of that additional corridor, which would be an additional contribution to forest fragmentation as one example. So we really found that, just as one example, their alternatives means assessment to be really very weak. Next slide, please. So aquatic impacts, we did jointly with Citizens for Responsible Industrial Industry in Northern Ontario, jointly retained Dr. Kevin Morgan, and I'll just commend to you his submissions, but I did want to make a few additional comments on aquatic, and that's with respect to the analysis of fish and fish habitat. They acknowledge that there would be a residual effect on fish impact, that there would be a residual effect on water quality, that there would be a residual effect on sedimentation, on water sedimentation and water clarity. And then they concluded that this would not be significant. We think all of those impacts are significant. They're long lasting. And we found that their statements, their conclusions of no significance were unsupported and I think not reflective of the reality. Next slide, please. So just 2 more slides. Review challenges, we found them to be many. We found that the extended time frame to be very, very difficult. It was difficult to have done a lot of work almost a decade ago, and then to somehow pick up that work. We found that the revised EIS, we found it, it was called an addendum. It wasn't an addendum, it was a replacement. It was a revised environmental impact statement. We found that making that comparison, going back and forth, was challenging. We found that the releasing them in a staged manner, which the proponent said would be helpful, we didn't find it helpful. And there were lots of little details like no page numbers on volume 2. Just, it was challenging. We also, and we'll follow up more with the impact assessment agency directly on this, but we also find that the new registry, what we consider to be the new registry, the registry under the Impact Assessment Act, it's much more difficult to use than the registry under when the agency was operating as the Canadian Environmental Assessment Agency. Lots of reasons. You have to go down sometimes 3 levels to open a document, and so on. And we will follow up with the agency directly on that. I will make one last comment in terms of the content, and that is that we found the socioeconomic issues were not given the address that we would like to have seen them be given. And I'll give you a couple of examples. The only adverse effect that generation mining identified in terms of socioec, the only adverse effect they identified is closure. I think there may be many benefits, and I acknowledge and fully appreciate the town's reasons for supporting the project for the economic benefits, but there are other adverse impacts. And I think that issues like a more detailed examination of impacts on housing shortages, housing prices for local residents, that I think is a large area that should have been explored more and was not. That there's only very general, ambiguous references to what the benefit sharing, revenue sharing will be with Bidikong Nishnabeg, but also with the town of Marathon. I don't find anything in the documentation that makes me think that we can rely on there actually being a supportable benefit sharing or a revenue stream going to the town of Marathon, even though the town of Marathon will be shouldering a fairly large infrastructure burden and social services burden and so on with the mine development. And lastly, I'll say we found no reference to just transitions funding, which we would expect in a mine coming on at this time. We would expect there to be a strategy, a plan for just transitions funding, to have funds set aside throughout mine operation to be available to the communities, both Bidikong, Nishnabeg, and the town of Marathon after closure. So in conclusion, next slide, please. We've identified a number of information gaps, missing information analysis. Perhaps that will come out in the course of the hearing. Perhaps it would not. At this point, our assessment is that generation mining has not presented a case with which the joint review panel can approve. That may change, it may not. Throughout the course of the hearing, we intend to monitor the proceedings and we'll review our current assessment and we'll communicate it to the joint review panel in our final submission at the hearing conclusion. So I thank you for your time and my apologies for going over the allotted time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lloyd, and we do appreciate you monitoring your time as you did. We'll certainly ensure that others have a similar amount of time, but appreciate the comprehensive issues that you've raised. So with that, I am going to open it up for questions. And if there are folks on the line that have questions for Ms. Lloyd and the information she's presented, please unmute and turn your cameras on and we'll we'll call you. Mayor Dumas, I see your hand up.
Yes, great. Thank you very much. In regards to some of the comments that was made, Northwatch has never reached out to the town of Marathon to have any discussions around the mine proposal over the many years that I can recall since the onset of this project way back in 2010. And as I stated through our presentation, we are always transparent and open and accessible to any type of a meeting and discussions around potential impacts to our community in our region. I get the understanding that they're there to protect the bigger picture, but we always look out for our opportunities. Was one comment she made, Ms. Lloyd made, that talked about the impact to Marathon. There is great opportunities for Marathon, and the Generation Mine project is within the municipal boundaries. So because of that, we will be able to tax this mine. And if you're familiar with the process of the Extraterritorial Tax Act that was put in place for Hemlo, we went to the government of Ontario and put this legislation in place in 1985 because there was going to be huge impacts, not just to Marathon, but also to Marathon, Manitouwadge, White River, and our First Nations communities. So the impact benefits that the First Nations receive are different from the municipalities because we're able to tax this mine project. So there will be substantial impact in income coming from that project over the life of the mine. The one comment you made about the socioeconomic impact, well, I look at it this way. If there's no jobs in our community, the impact to our community is much greater than there is without jobs, with jobs, because if there's jobs here, people are working, schools are open, recreation facilities are open. Without jobs, we start looking at opportunities that are not there. We have to start shutting down facilities. That impacts everybody greatly. And we all know throughout Canada, when there's no jobs in depressed areas of economic communities, it's really a struggle for those communities to survive. So we're looking forward to the project, and there's great opportunities for the socioeconomic impact to be beneficial rather than negative. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Dumas. Ms. Lloyd.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Dumas, for those comments. And I do remember the work that the town of Manitouwadge, the town of Marathon did to get benefits to the communities from the Hemlo camp, and applauded that work. And I appreciate your comments that there will be economic benefits. That's good. That's what I would expect. I didn't see it in the environmental impact statement. I didn't see it clearly set out, and that, you know, that may be for particular reasons that should have been at least stated. So maybe the details don't need to be there, but there needs to be at least a description, and I did not find it in the environmental impact statement. In terms of not reaching out to you, Mayor Dumas, I do actually remember having a conversation with you in a church basement in Marathon. I think it was around 2012, in a meeting that Northwatch was part of organizing, when a number of hearing participants were in Marathon for a few days, considering the project and discussing the project. And I think we had a very good conversation, one-on-one, as well as I remember you contributing to the group conversation that evening. So it was a long time ago. It was 10 years maybe ago, but I appreciate your comment that we haven't reached out in the last few years, and we'll endeavor to correct that in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lloyd. Are there other questions from participants? Mr. Dave, I see your hand up. Please go ahead.
Madam Chair. So one of the points, and thank you, Ms. Lloyd, for a very thorough presentation. The level of detail that you went into was appreciated. One of the points that I particularly appreciate was going into the Missing Murdered Indigenous Women report, and the note that there, the number of jobs that the mine is purported to have create or will create will result in a lot of workers. The question was, Madam Chair, the accommodations for the workers, if any, and whether through the research or the examination of materials, whether Ms. Lloyd's encountered any proposed plan for the accommodations of these workers, whether in the town of Marathon. And apologies if this should have been directed to Mayor Dumas, or accommodations closer to the mine site. Thank you.
So.
Sorry, Ms. Lloyd, do you have your, yes, you have your hand up.
Thanks. Thank you for that question. And we did look at this, and we found various descriptions. I think the overall impression is that it would be accommodated in the town. But, I think as I remarked earlier, we found the descriptions to be varied and rather imprecise. So perhaps it's a question for Generation Mining. We would certainly like to see more clarity on this issue. And we would also like to see comments or commitments from, I suppose, from Generation Mining, some evidence that they've considered the impacts of women and including and particularly Indigenous women in this respect. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lloyd. Mr. Dave, I wonder, perhaps, could you repeat your question just so we're clear what question is being asked? I'm sorry, I didn't.
No, my apologies. Thank you for allowing me to clarify. And just by ways of background, the reason this came up is I recall there was a written submission from a citizen, if I recall correctly. I can't remember their name or the document number, but they asked about this issue. So I was asking specifically about the proposed plan for accommodating workers, whether it's going to be in town or closer to the mine site in the way of camps. And the purpose of this question is just for scheduling. What session will it be addressed on is really, because this is a general session. My intent is not to get into it now. I just want to know which session to attend.
Thank you, Mr. Dave. I appreciate the clarification. And I see Mr. Barretto, you have your hand up.
Yes, Madam Chair, and I know we have a socioeconomics day scheduled later on. However, I think the core of Mr. Dave's question and some comments from Ms. Lloyd related to Generation's plans for housing. So if just a description of that here would be helpful, that is something that the Generation panel will be happy to provide. I know this is Ms. Lloyd and Northwatch's presentation. However, we have a flexible process and we want to make sure that the correct information is on the record.
Yes, please go ahead. I think we have time for that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I'll turn over to Mr. Anwell, and who will receive the question. And you may need a moment to check with the colleagues we have to focus on this, but we'll start with Mr. Anwell. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lloyd, Mr. Dave, Mayor Dumas, Daryl. So if I could put the accommodations into context. So there's two different phases of accommodations for the project. The first phase is during construction. So at this point in time, we've established we have part of the accommodations complex for the construction project, and we'll likely have to expand that. Now that'll be dependent on the full construction execution scheduling, which is down the road a little bit. And then the subsequent phase is for the operations camp. And Ms. Lloyd, as you flagged, the details of the camp outlined a 2-floor permanent accommodation. And the reason we know what the accommodations complex would look like in general, but not specifically the location. There's two groups that we're dealing with to set the location, both for the construction camp and the operations camp. And that's both the town of Marathon and our partners at Biktagan Nishnabeg, who we have some details of arrangements for contracting of both those processes as the operation goes ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Anwell. And Mayor Dumas, I see your hand up as well.
Yes, thanks. In regards to the housing portfolio, we'll have some information in the socioeconomic process future in this hearing, which will be very exciting for the town. Regardless of what's happening with Generation, we have other projects that are looking forward. And as Ms. Lloyd made comment about the housing costs, through COVID, Marathon has seen an increase in housing like everybody has experienced throughout Ontario and Canada. We know that it's there and it has impacts. But as stated in our presentation, with the 67% higher income from the mining sector, we believe our housing portfolio is still very, very affordable. But we will have some exciting presentations through the socioeconomic impacts portion of the hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Dumas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the clarification.
You're welcome. Sorry, I turned my mic off. Are there other questions or comments for Ms. Lloyd from participants this time? I don't see hands, so maybe I'll turn to my panel members. Ms. Bruce? Ms. Drescher? Nothing at this time. Thank you. I think as a few of you have stated, we have a lot more days of our hearing and a lot more in-depth topic-specific sessions that will speak to some of your questions, certainly Ms. Lloyd, and some others in a lot more detail. But I appreciate everybody giving a good summary in response to some of the questions that were raised today. So I thank you for that. And with that, I think we will turn to
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, sorry to interrupt. I just want, if I could take a moment to, Mr. Animal, just want to thank Ms. Lloyd for her remarks. We know these days are long and we don't know who will be here at the end. So we want to just change our plan if we may. So, okay.
Fair enough, Mr. Bretto. Thank you.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Ms. Lloyd, thank you very much for your, clearly you've done an awful lot of work. So I appreciate your interest in the project going ahead, and you're challenging of us, frankly. Thank you very much. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Anwell. Ms. Lloyd, any final remarks?
Yes, if I could. Thanks very much for the questions and the comments. And I did not, in the responses from Generation Mining, hear anything additive to what was in the environmental the addendum to the environmental impact statement. I don't know if this can be accommodated in your process, Madam Chair, but if Generation Mining could provide some references in advance of their presentation, if they're going to address these issues in the socioeconomic day, that's excellent. If they're going to provide additional information, if it would be possible for them to post that on the registry in advance, that would assist us in preparing for that day and potentially preparing questions to the proponent on that day. Thank you.
I think you've raised a couple of questions. Can you give me just a moment, please? Sorry, I've got my mic back on. Would some of the references that Ms. Lloyd spoke about with respect to what's contained in the addendum or the 2012 information, is Gen PGM able to accommodate those references for Ms. Lloyd?
Madam Chair, I might be of assistance here. I understand Ms. Lloyd's interest is in the references that would be supporting some of the socioeconomic issues, and in particular, housing. And under the hearing procedures, Generation is required to file visual aid 7 days before each hearing session, as it is done. For example, reference 1104 is Generation's general presentation, which was filed about a week ago. For the socioeconomic session, Generation will do the same. It will be filing its presentation with its visual aid, which is a summary of socioeconomic matters. And in those presentations, what Generation does is summarizes the relevant references from the record with hyperlinks to the CIAR number, understanding that Ms. Lloyd has developed some expertise in this area, finding links, but we're really trying to make it as easy as possible for participants to click a concise presentation and see what Generation believes is the relevant information in that area. So what I propose is that the panel continue its practice of requiring visual aids 7 days in advance of presentations, and Generation will file its socioeconomic presentation within that time frame with the relevant links to information on the record included.
Thank you, Mr. Barretto. Yes, we did set out the timelines, and as you know, a lot of those questions are related to the socioeconomic. So I appreciate your suggestion, and we will stay within those timelines. So thank you very much. Ms. Lloyd.
Yeah, if I could just clarify. So having references to what already exists in the file documentation would be helpful. My point was more around is generation mining going to provide additional information? I think that there are gaps in what's available. Maybe not, maybe I just didn't find all the references, but if they're going to provide additional information, will that be filed as part of their supplementary 7 days in advance? I guess if we could treat the visual aids as a supplementary and use that as the same deadline if they're going to provide additional information to address some of the gaps that have been identified. I'll just leave that as a comment. I'm not asking for a response. Thank you. Thank you for considering that.
Thank you, Ms. Lloyd. And yes, I think all the deadlines have been set out, and any information that does come in for the hearing process will be publicly posted, so should be accessible in a timely fashion.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Lloyd, and to all participants for questions. I think our next presenter is the Thunder Bay Community Economic Development Commission. And I wonder who we have on the line representing that organization. Good morning.
Morning. Hi. Good morning, Madam Chair, panel, and all participants. I'm Eric Sakruski, the Chief Executive Officer of the Thunder Bay Community Economic Development Commission. We are an independent, not-for-profit agency with a general mandate to support economic development in the city of Thunder Bay and, of course, also Northwestern Ontario. In the efforts of full disclosure for the panel and the process and those participants, I need to inform you that I have had past direct experience on this project as a consultant or part of the consultant team from actually the period of approximately 2007 to probably about 2017. I have had no involvement or interest in the project whatsoever since 2017, and have been closely monitoring it as an important regional economic project or potential project in the mining space. So with that being said, I'm here to offer some high-level comments, obviously from an economic development lens and a regional lens, as well as on behalf of the city of Thunder Bay. But I think I can do that in a way that adds, I think, some credibility in terms of having firsthand knowledge of the property, the proposed project, and of course, the environmental assessment process itself. I have spent hundreds of days on the property, probably have collected the very first baseline water samples that have been collected across the property. I've seen any and all of the wildlife that exists on the property. I'm fundamentally aware of the geologic and topographic challenges that the property offers in terms of land use potential and things like that. And I've spent many days in the surrounding Indigenous communities getting to know those peoples and their concerns relative to the potential project. So some color, Madam Chair, on my background. So from the CEDC's perspective in Thunder Bay, we produced a very relevant document that does capture some elements of the Marathon project, and that is our mining readiness strategy, which was published at the end of 2020, early 2021. This was a regional-based study to examine the 15 major exploration projects that were well published and fairly significant in Northwestern Ontario and were established in the exploration pipeline, as well as to look at the economic impacts on Thunder Bay and the surrounding region of the 6 operating mine sites that we're fortunate to have. We invested in this current analysis of the mining sector relative to Thunder Bay and the region because, quite frankly, we saw that this is going to become is a substantial part of the economic future of Northwestern Ontario and the city of Thunder Bay as a hub for service and supply corporations working in that space. When we received the results of the study as prepared by a third party, M&P, as well as with various engineering firms supporting, it was based on direct feedback from mining companies, including Generation. So this was not anecdotal evidence that was created in terms or that was generated by us or our experts. It was in fact based on a database built by companies such as Generation, as well as all the other ones that are operating in our region. And we learned a lot about the potential for mining and the impacts that it may have on our economy. So with respect to the Marathon project, as reiterated by other speakers already, copper and PGM do form, they are critical minerals. And I would just like to reiterate that it is probably weekly that I get a call from a senior level of government, whether it be the federal government, various agencies, or the province and various ministries, that regards these minerals being important in fundamental economic development plans, as well as investments at those senior levels of government associated with the green economy, with electric vehicle componentry and or pollution reduction equipment. So my first key point is that we recognize and think it's very important in terms of the minerals and the resources that Generation is looking to develop with this project. It's not just another gold project. It has high value critical minerals that are in extremely high demand in Canada and Ontario. And we view that as an important element in the economy for Ontario, particularly, which is striving to support other major investments locally, but also obviously in the GTA around the auto manufacturing and the OEMs associated with electric vehicles. So we think the resources that are there are really important in the mix, and probably more so than some of the other traditional minerals that are being mined. In terms of our regional perspective, although Thunder Bay is technically outside the socioeconomic impact regional study area, or RSA, as per the documents that are available, we think Thunder Bay does actually form part of a broader regional study area. And I just wanted to offer some color around our thoughts for that, because I think in general it's quite positive. Thunder Bay has established itself as a regional hub for mining, construction, and operation service and supply companies. As part of our mining readiness strategy, we have documented well over 400, in fact, it's closer to 440 companies that are now currently supporting the mining sector, whether it be for the front end activities associated with exploration or advanced exploration, leading in through construction, and then certainly operation and closure. It forms a hugely significant component of our local economy now. Many of these companies, it should be noted, have successfully pivoted from traditionally servicing the fiber or the forest-based economy or bioeconomy, and have successfully now pivoted into this mining space. And I can't understate how fragile this is and how important it is to Thunder Bay to have additional projects like this coming in the near horizon pipeline. Those companies are fragile in that they do require obviously additional work, additional contract opportunities in order to continue to build their workforce capacities at a grassroots level, but also their skills, their product offerings, and their services. So this is very important from the perspective of those 440 companies that we have surveyed and represent in this space. We surveyed over 18 mining companies and learned that with their significant investments and potential investments in Northwestern Ontario, we were explicitly told what they require in the region, and resoundingly workforce development, additional service and supply capacities, and infrastructure were the top needs that were critical to miners to advance projects like this to production. Thunder Bay has a regional workforce, which is very well poised as is to operate out of the bedroom community of Thunder Bay to a project like this. And although we certainly recognize, as stated in the Town of Marathon project, if the majority of workforce is likely to reside, in close proximity to the mine site, and we think that is fantastic and an asset of the project. We certainly know that whether through direct contract employment opportunities, through construction and operation, there will be significant opportunities for folks that live and reside in Thunder Bay to work in a transient nature at this project. So it is in sort of our neighborhood, and we certainly will be a bedroom community with service and supply companies capturing opportunity. Our perspective really on projects like this is that Thunder Bay will perform in a supporting manner to the communities that are directly tied and connected to the process or to the project. So, we're happy to play a supporting role in the supply of skilled labor, trades, and professional services. We're proud to be part of the regional village that will support this project. And we're proud to also, from a socioeconomic element, I don't think it can be understated, that we're prepared to continue to act proactively and in a partnership manner with all the immediate communities that are looking to participate and benefit from this project. So we have had meetings with the CEO of Marathon. We're well in tune with, their infrastructure capacities and what their challenges may be. And I guess I'm here to say that the City of Thunder Bay is here to support the town of Marathon. We're here to support Pick River First Nation and Pick Mobert First Nation as we may in any of those regional aspects or elements. And we're here to make sure that the project doesn't cause any overdue strain on any of those socioeconomic or infrastructure elements related to those communities. As a final note on sort of the regional perspective, we do see that and forecast that as production tapers down at the historical Hemlo camp, we think the timing of this Marathon project is essential to ensure the continuity of both local workforce, but also regional workforce. Mining projects are finite in nature, and as that facility may taper down, it's obvious that this may provide some continuity for retaining skilled labor and service and supply capacities, both locally and in the regional village, so to speak. Our mining readiness strategy report does document a pipeline of overall projects in the region, moving from exploration to mine development. And we've certainly heard loud and clear from the province and the federal government that there is a strong need to stimulate the economy after the pandemic or the impacts of COVID-19. And we think the best way to do that is through responsible resource development projects such as this. Our study indicates that the regional economic impacts from mining will grow from an estimated $4.3 billion last year to almost $9 billion in 2026, but only if responsible development projects like this are approved and can enter the construction phase and sequence of the mine life project. So the Marathon project, from our perspective, is clearly the next project in the region that is in the environmental assessment and permitting and approvals timeline. And this follows closely after Greenstone Gold's project in the community municipality of Greenstone, which is now currently entering the construction phase. From our perspective, the timing of this project could not be better. And we think it's critical in many aspects, but most importantly, as a post-COVID endemic construction and operating job creation investment. The continuity between the Greenstone project and the Marathon project offers an opportunity for Thunder Bay companies and regional companies to move forward seamlessly from one project potentially in the early phases of construction into the post-permitting and approvals phase of the project, if approved by the panel and both levels of government. So with that, Madam Chair, I think the panel and the government can send a strong message to Ontario and the world that Northwestern Ontario is open for responsible resource development opportunities by approving this project in a timely manner. In closing, I would like to commend Generation Mining on demonstrating excellent environmental social governance efforts since assuming this project. And in particular, I think the work that they've done in partnering with local Indigenous communities to create economic development opportunities is very positive. And certainly their partnership approach to working with the town of Marathon is commendable and one that we would envy from the City of Thunder Bay's perspective. So great work by that entire team there. From my review of the available EA documentation, which has been quite high level, it appears this project can be a gold star example of major resource projects moving forward in a timely manner with the appropriate environmental mitigation commitments to create positive social, economic, and environmental benefits for local communities, the region, and of course, all of Canada. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zagruski. I appreciate your comments this morning and your participation. With that, I am going to open it up again for any questions or comments from participants on the line? Don't see any at the moment. I'll turn to my panel members. Ms. Bruce, any questions for you at this time? Thank you. Ms. Drescher, any questions? I have one question, if you wouldn't mind. Mr. Zagórski, you mentioned that I think for approximately 10 years you did some work associated with this proposed mine. Could you describe a little bit about what that was exactly? Were you a consultant?
Yes, just to elaborate, Madam Chair. So I was the CEO of True Grit Engineering, a Thunder Bay-based 60-person environmental engineering firm, and had participation on a couple of elements of the project when it was owned by Marathon PGM, then transitioning on to the consulting team with Stillwater Canada. Our work specifically in those days was revolving around the hydrology baseline work, hydrogeological baseline work, some of the acoustical or air and noise elements as well, and in particular, I believe, mainly around the baseline data collection work that was done across the local and regional study areas. So, you know, in the efforts of full transparency for the panel and any participants, I thought it important to disclose that. And again, I've had no interest whatsoever in the project other than keeping an eye on it from a regional perspective as a very important economic development initiative in the region. And just wanted you to be aware of that.
Thank you very much for the clarification. I really appreciate it. And thank you again for your presentation today. I think in the interest of time, it is 10:15 by my clock, 10:16. How about we'll return at 10:30? We'll take a short break and we'll then proceed with our next set of presenters when we return at 10:30.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Generation Mining would just like to also thank Mr. Sikorski for his participation briefly here. Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Anwell. Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Anwell, thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Sikorski, I've heard your names plenty of time, so it's finally good to see you in 2D anyways. And I'd like to make one correction to one comment you made. Thank you for the gold star. I'd prefer it be a PGM star. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much, everyone, and we'll see everyone back here at 10:30. Good. Welcome back, everyone. We're just 2 minutes after 10:30. So we are going to continue. Can see everybody back again. Our next presenter is the Thunder Bay Chamber of Commerce. So I would ask that I think I see Ms. Robinson, you've unmuted and your camera's on, so I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thank you very much. As you mentioned, my name is Charlotte Robinson, and I'm the president of the Thunder Bay Chamber of Commerce. And I want to thank the panel for the opportunity to spend a few moments to outline our support for the Marathon Palladium project. Let me start by acknowledging that I am participating in today's virtual meeting from the city of Thunder Bay, which has been built on the traditional lands of the Ojibwa peoples of Fort William First Nation, original signatories to the Robinson Superior Treaty signed in 1850. And we also recognize the significant contributions of the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples to our heritage, social, cultural, spiritual, and economic wealth. The Thunder Bay Chamber of Commerce is a voluntary, member-driven organization of individuals and businesses working together to advance the commercial, financial, and civic interests of our community. We represent nearly 800 businesses of all sizes and industries with approximately 20,000 employees in the Thunder Bay area. Our mission is to be a catalyst for a stronger business community. So whether we're pooling our resources to offer member learning opportunities, raising our voices on policy issues, or facilitating connections between members of the business community, we know that businesses that work together are stronger. The mining industry is an important growth area for our chamber members. In the last 10 years, our chamber, in collaboration with the Thunder Bay Community Economic Development Commission, has hosted or participated in numerous information sessions, procurement networking activities, and trade shows to help to educate and inform local businesses about regional mining developments. These sessions continue to be of significant interest, with hundreds of participants eager to learn more about new mining developments and procurement opportunities. As mentioned by my colleague at the CEDC, Thunder Bay is a vital supply and service center for mines across the Northwest. The region is home to 6 operating mines, producing over 790,000 ounces of gold and over 200,000 ounces of palladium per year. The region also is host to an additional 15 major exploration sites. According to the Thunder Bay CEDC's mining readiness strategy, the economic impact of mining in Northwestern Ontario in 2020 was approximately $4.3 billion. The city of Thunder Bay is a key piece of this regional success story. Approximately 850 Thunder Bay residents work at the mines in the region, while thousands more are employed by the over 400 service and supply companies that support these mining operations and exploration sites. The Marathon Palladium project proposed by Generation PGM is an exciting new chapter in our region's mining story and will bring significant opportunities to the people of Marathon, the North Shore, Thunder Bay, and indeed the entire Northwest. With over 500 construction and up to 375 operations jobs, the opportunities for those who work in skilled trades, engineering, human resources, and procurement are immense. This long-term project also provides an excellent prospect for the creation of new apprenticeships and skill development activities in a wide range of areas to help train the workforce of tomorrow and address the need for skilled workers across the region. Recent mining and infrastructure projects have focused on collaboration with local post-secondary education institutions, skills training organizations, and First Nations communities to support their workforce needs. And these examples provide best practices that can be duplicated here to achieve similarly positive outcomes. We encourage continued dialogue and consultation with regional First Nation communities to develop positive working relationships, partnerships, and benefit agreements that will ensure that business and employment opportunities are realized by our Indigenous peoples. We also welcome and appreciate the ongoing significant efforts of Generation PGM to identify and minimize environmental impacts of the project on area lands, lakes, rivers, wildlife, and atmosphere. The Chamber believes that economic, environmental, and social impacts must be carefully balanced to fully achieve success. There are significant impacts to the social fabric of the community through the development of a new mine. The positive feelings that are generated through the growth of the town and the region, the addition of new families to local schools and sports clubs, and the entrepreneurial spirit that is sparked through a desire for more diverse products and services. A new mining development can be the catalyst that reignites community pride and brings people together with renewed enthusiasm. And so the Thunder Bay Chamber is excited about the possibilities that the Marathon Palladium project offers for our region, the creation of jobs, training, and skills development activities, Indigenous and community partnerships, and entrepreneurial opportunities. And we look forward to working with Generation PGM and other regional stakeholders to bring this project to fruition. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Robinson. I appreciate your time today and your presentation to the panel. At this time, I'll open it up for any questions that our participants may have for Ms. Robinson. Seeing none, I'll turn to my panel members. Ms. Bruce, any questions? Yeah. No? Ms. Drescher? No? All good? With that, I'll thank you so very much for your time today and appreciate you coming to the hearing.
Thank you very much.
And Madam Chair, if I may, Generation Mining would also thank Ms. Robinson and the Thunder Bay Chamber of Commerce's presentation. Mr. Animal, please go ahead.
Thank you, Ms. Robinson. You've got some big shoes to fill with John Mason leaving the group. So look forward to dealing with and working with Thunder Bay going ahead. Thank you very much for your commentary.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll now turn to our next presenter, which is Environment North. Do we have folks from Environment North on the phone with us?
Good morning. This is Carrie Blaze, Legal Counsel to Environment North.
Good morning, Ms. Blaze.
And I'm joined this morning by Dr. Karen Peterson, who I believe is also on the screen.
Good morning, Dr. Peterson.
Good morning.
I'll hand over the floor to you, just as I've reminded some other participants, if you could speak clearly for the court reporter and relatively slowly so they can capture everything and we can hear everything clearly. With that, thank you for joining.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you also for putting up our slides. So good morning once again, and thank you for the opportunity for us to speak today. I am Carrie Blaze, Legal Counsel to Environment North, and I'm joining you from Robinson Huron Treaty Territory, which is also the traditional and ancestral lands of the Doquis and Nipissing First Nations. And as I mentioned, I am pleased to be joined by Dr. Karen Peterson, who is Environment North's consultant in planning and development and impact assessment. And she is joining us from the Robinson Superior 1850 Treaty Territory and the traditional and ancestral lands of the Fort William First Nation. Next slide, please. Thanks. So we will be sharing Environment North's perspective regarding Gen PGM's mining project in Marathon, Ontario. And by way of background, Environment North is a regional nonprofit organization based in Thunder Bay, and since 1972 have relied on research, education, and community advocacy to promote sustainable communities and the conservation of natural resources in the Northwest. Among their priorities is to create awareness and affect change on climate change and its impacts in Northwestern Ontario, while empowering regional citizens to become more responsible decision makers and involved in environmentally significant decision-making processes. Environment North has also been actively involved in this environmental assessment for the past 10 years, including when the proponent was Stillwater Canada. Next slide, please. So in the interest of time, we'll address 4 important topics today, and these build on our written submission commenting on the EIS as well as the EIS addendum. And so for ease of reference, Environment North's written submission, which we submit remains relevant to the panel, is reference number 902. And so first, I'm going to address the panel's authority to actually consider climate change within this EA as a necessary and critical aspect of the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act 2012, or CIA 2012 for short, its purpose of promoting sustainability. Second, I will discuss why climate impacts are relevant considerations when assessing environmental effects. And then I will turn the floor to Environment North's expert, Dr. Karen Peterson, who will discuss the importance of meaningful public participation and demonstrate why a robust socioeconomic analysis must be required. Underlining many of Environment North's submissions today are concerns about climate impacts, both those that may be caused by the project and the impacts of climate-induced severe weather events on the project site and its activities, because these remain understudied aspects of GenPGM's proposal. And it's on this basis that Environment North submits that the panel cannot find that the project is not likely to cause significant adverse environmental effects to our health, the environment, and the economy. And we are hopeful that our brief presentation today, as well as our previous written comments, will highlight the steps which can be taken to address these concerns. Next slide, please. Thanks. So in making the recommendation for this EA, the panel must have regard to the purposes of CIA 2012 set out in section 4, which among other items include the promotion of sustainable development. And so sustainability, it's a goal which encompasses both biophysical, human, and socioeconomic systems. And it's also the process or the program of action that allows for development, which meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And so as Environment North details in pages 2 to 6 of its written submission, reference number 902, to achieve sustainability requires meeting climate commitments and preserving a viable legacy for future generations. And while GenPGM references its role in enabling a sustainable future and asserts that the project will support the achievement of a successful and sustainable future, and these are quotes from the EIS addendum, the project's alignment with sustainability is otherwise constrained to a narrow accounting of greenhouse gas emissions. And so in our written submission, Environment North sets out a number of ways climate considerations ought to have been considered, and I'll direct you to table 1 at page 3 of our written submission. So for instance, just to recap very briefly, where GenPGM notes in its EIS addendum that catch basins will be based on a 1 in 25-year rainfall event, Environment North submits that this overlooks the fact that environmental baselines often rely on historical climate data, which do not represent future environmental conditions and therefore do not accurately predict impacts. And in this regard, Environment North has recommended that all project components within all 3 phases of the project, from construction, operations, and decommissioning, be evaluated against climate forecasts and climate modeling. And Environment North also recommended that GenPGM develop a greenhouse gas emissions management plan, which identifies viable pathways to net zero and sets greenhouse gas reduction goals. And in line with the polluter pays principle, a principle that posits that the party responsible for causing the harm bears the cost of managing and preventing adverse impacts on human health and the environment, GenPGM must be responsible for its emissions and be obligated to offset them. And in Environment North's view, it is GenPGM that bears the burden of demonstrating that all purposes of CIA 2012, including that of sustainable development, are met. In other words, it falls to GenPGM to submit the necessary evidence to meet the Act's provisions regarding sustainability. Unfortunately, these gaps remain, and there is insufficient level of detail to adequately describe that the project meets the sustainability purposes established under Section 4.1H of SIA 2012. Next slide, please. So at pages 5 through 6 of our written submission, I've copied a number of questions we set out to assist the panel in determining whether a project is aligned with sustainability. And we reiterate that climate change is not simply a calculation of greenhouse gases and whether Canada's climate targets are being met, but climate change must be read in line with the purposes of the Act and whether there is alignment with sustainability. And by asking these questions, we can shift the focus to actually better understand climate change as part of the sustainability, which emphasizes the positive contributions to nature, to ecosystems.
Ms. Blaze?
Yes.
I wonder if I could, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. I wonder if Dr. Peterson could perhaps mute her mic. We're hearing a lot of paper rustling. I apologize, but appreciate it. Might be helpful to hear you better. Thank you.
Perfect. Yeah, not a problem. And good timing as well. Next slide. Great, thank you. So in a second aspect I'll briefly comment on before turning it to Dr. Peterson is considering whether this project will cause significant adverse environmental effects pursuant to Section 5, Sub 2, Sub A of SIA 2012. So there's two branches to consider with regards to environmental effects. First, the panel must consider those which are directly linked, such as those that are direct or proximate to the project. And secondly, the panel must consider those that are necessarily incidental environmental effects, which are consequential effects due to a change that may result from this federal decision. And so we go into detail about this in pages 6 through 11 of our written submission. And Environment North submits climate effects are environmental effects within the scope of the assessment by virtue of being, quote, a change that may be caused to the environment that would occur in a province other than Ontario, where it's being carried out. As drafted, unfortunately, Gen PGM's EIS documents categorize climate change and greenhouse gases as one component within the atmospheric environment, the valued environmental component. And as a result, the component of climate change and greenhouse gases accounts for one of over 50 valued environmental components, or VECs, that are reviewed in the EIS. And this is a problematic approach for three related reasons. First, climate change should not be identified as a single component within a larger group of VECs, and rather should be integrated within all ecologically sensitive VECs that are reviewed within the EIS. Second, an analysis of environmental effects is not simply a deduction of human-induced stresses on ecological systems. Rather, it requires an analysis of impacts on maintaining the integrity of those systems and associated life support functions. And third, mining infrastructure from tailings ponds and the waste management areas have been designed on the assumption that climate is stable. And therefore, the risk of structural failure due to the forces of climate change in all stages, again, from construction operations to post-closure, is of great concern. Next slide, please. So in the interest of time, I will leave this slide for the panel's review and again direct you to our more detailed comments in our written submission at reference number 902, where we detail how climate effects ought to have been detailed within the proponent's recommended mitigation and adaptation measures aimed at mitigating the significant adverse environmental effects of the project. Next slide. Thanks. So in closing, Environment North leaves the panel with two final recommendations on climate, which are detailed again at pages 10 through 13 of our written submission. The first is that all and not just some of the greenhouse gases which require reporting under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change ought to be detailed by the proponent in the EIS. Second, Given the stated interest of the public's interest in this project and its climate impacts, the greenhouse gases should be publicly reportable as part of the federal greenhouse gas reporting program. And now I will pass the floor over to Dr. Karen Peterson, who will comment on whether meaningful public participation in accordance with the purposes of SIA 2012 has been upheld. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Carrie, and good morning, Chair, panel, and participants. On my slide, next slide, please. Okay, meaningful participation needs to involve the public throughout the full scope of the project, right from the outset, right from the initial scoping stage where valued components are identified so they can be interpreted within the social and economic context where the project is located. Through each phase of the project, the public can assist in the identification of impacts, the strategies for mitigation, mine closure, as well as the post-use of the property. Inclusion of the public throughout all phases of the project avoids conflict, constrained relations, and builds trust. To be meaningful, consultation needs to include relationship building where the proponents get to know the people, their values, their diverse perspectives, their quality of life, and the significance of the impacts that could occur. Collaborative forms of communication would bring forth these values and perspectives. The project's strategies for engagement were informing in nature rather than participatory. Informing is passive and generally a one-way form of communication. Although comments may be documented, there is no formal mechanism in place to ensure these comments are taken into consideration and reflected within the decision-making process. Environment North finds there is insufficient information that adequately reflects that meaningful public participation was provided in accordance with the purposes of SIA 2012. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, the environmental assessment needs to incorporate divergent views, given the potential for adverse effects as well as positive ones, the risk for long-term and or irreversible consequences, and the implications for community well-being. Generation PGM utilized vague terminology and relied upon assumptions such as may also result in, may affect nearby landowners, may also be incompatible. Generation PGM also relied upon secondary data sources, their own past experience with other projects, and their own current knowledge of mitigation strategies in order to formulate their conclusions. Environment North finds the project has not provided the robust evaluation necessary to identify potential impacts and to determine the appropriate response. Next slide, please. Cumulative effects considers the past, present, and future human activities as well as natural changes. A project-specific lens is not sufficient to determine incremental effects from past, present, or future activities. Scant attention was paid to the other projects that are occurring in the region. Without consideration of cumulative effects, it is impossible to anticipate when social or environmental thresholds are reached. When thresholds are reached, systems can collapse. Environment North finds there is insufficient information regarding past, present, and future activities that collectively could cause adverse effects to the environment and people, which is contrary to SIA 2012 that encourages the study of cumulative effects. Okay, thank you very much. That's my presentation. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Dr. Peterson and Ms. Blaze. Appreciate your time today. And again, my apologies for the interruption, Ms. Blaze, in your presentation. I'd like to turn it over to participants for any questions they may have for Environment North. I don't see any questions from participants. Ms. Bruce, any questions? Questions at this time, Ms. Drescher? Questions? Hey. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate that. And I'll turn it over to Gen PGM. I see Mr. Barretto.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair.
Questions?
And Gen PGM has no questions. We wanted to thank Ms. Blaze and Dr. Peterson for their detailed comments, but I'll turn it over to Mr. Anwald.
Yeah,
Mr.
thank you
Anwar.
very much. Drew Anwell here for the record, Madam Chair. Thanks for the time. Dr. Peterson, Ms. Blaze, thank you for your comments and your in-depth study of the project. Contributions on all sides are always worthwhile. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Anwell. I will say that this is the lineup of presenters we had for today's proceedings. As everyone can see, we are completing our day early. That is likely not going to be the case for the remaining hearing days. So, but I will thank everyone for today's participation. I wonder if Generation PGM had any remarks they'd care to share with us before we do conclude today's proceedings.
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you for the opportunity. And today was a very efficient day, and we thank all the participants. If we could have 15 minutes, if that'd be okay with the panel, we're just trying to summarize the submissions made in the last couple hours and have a very brief closing that covers some of the topics raised.
Fair enough. Yes, we do have time for that. So why don't we return at 11:15 to hear from Generation PGM?
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you to the participants, and we'll see you back at 11:15.
Madam Chair, is there any way you can ask? Is there any way I can ask an informal question just while we're briefly stood down here, just about informal conversations? Like if this were to happen in person, we'd be able to canvas during the breaks with individuals. I understand that there's no breakout rooms here, so while the proponents working on their closing, I was wondering if we might be able to briefly discuss that. Just how is that going to work in a virtual hearing? Just informal conversations between some of the participants.
Mr. Dave, I'm not sure that everyone is still on the line. So would you mind posing your question just before I'll ask you to pose your question when we reconvene at 11:15, if that's all right?
Of course. All right. My apologies. Thank you.
Oh, no worries. Thank you very much. We're live. Okay. Welcome back, everyone, and thank you for your indulgence for this short break. There are actually two procedural matters I did want to cover before we turn the floor over to Generation PGM. Just before we had a break, Mr. Dave, you did have a question. I wasn't sure if everyone was still actively engaged, so I wonder if I could ask you to repeat your question so we understand.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to clarify, and apologies for the timing earlier. Was my intention to leave anyone in the dark. It was just a quick procedural question, and mostly because this is a virtual hearing. If this was in person, my understanding would be that during the break, participants would have the opportunity to canvass with each other and perhaps engage in mutual interests that are tangential to the hearing and not really appropriate for a direct question. The reason I ask is through the course of the presentations this morning, I had a few questions that wouldn't necessarily be appropriate to put on the record, but are material to my my seemingly exhaustible pursuit of improving Pays Plat First Nations internet. My question is there any accommodation for those informal conversations in the panel procedures and the hearing as it is being conducted virtually?
Thank you, Mr. Dave. Appreciate the clarification. I think our procedures do speak to this issue, basically outlining that if you do wish to have that private conversation, you can arrange that with whomever it is you'd like to arrange. We have not done so within the logistics of this hearing. So I would have to leave it to you to make those connections if you're looking to have a conversation outside of the hearing.
Then in that vein, Madam Chair, if I could ask how, because the contact information for most of the participants is redacted. There's no chat function in the Zoom. The logistics of that is, I guess, my question.
What I'll do, thanks, Mr. Dave. What I will do is have a member of the Secretariat reach out to you, and hopefully they can assist in your questions so that you can make those connections.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dave. The second matter I'd like to bring to your attention today is one related to a submission. So Michipicoten First Nation has forwarded to the panel a written submission for the aquatic environment topic specific session, which begins this Thursday, March the 17th. This submission replaces one previously filed in error by Michipicoten. Given that the new submission replaces a previous submission that had been filed in accordance with the timelines established by the panel, we are prepared to accept the new submission, notwithstanding that it's being provided only 2 days in advance of Michipicoten's scheduled presentation on water this coming Thursday. I did want to advise all the participants of this in the event that anyone has any concerns. So I will leave that with you. If there are concerns or questions, please direct those to the Secretariat in a timely manner as well, and we'll go from there. So just wanted to ensure you had that information early enough.
Madam Chair, if I may, thank you for notifying participants of this new submission. Generation will review it when it's posted to the public registry. And if we have any comments, we'll put them on the registry or state them at the start of the session tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barretto. And with that, I think we are turning over to Generation PGM for remarks as we conclude our proceedings today. Mr. Anwell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to thank everybody for being here today again and participating in the hearings. I appreciate the questions, comments, and considerations that we've heard today in today's general hearing session. So today what we heard were presentations from the town of Marathon regarding their support of the project and the positive economic benefits to the town. We also heard from Northwatch, Environment North, regarding their views on the review of the information regarding the project. From the town of Marathon, Mayor Dumas and Mr. Skorczynski, I usually call him Daryl, from the town of Marathon this morning. He described the town of Marathon as a vibrant town and the hub of the North Shore. His position is that the economic effects of not proceeding with the project are much greater than moving forward with this important opportunity for the region. We'd like to thank the town for their ongoing and enthusiastic support of the generation project and look forward to continuing our great relationship with them. Next, we heard from Ms. Lloyd from Northwatch, who expressed various project-related concerns. We will provide a more fulsome response in the various technical sessions, but Generation would like to take the time to provide a few brief comments to her concerns. First, Ms. Lloyd referenced information gaps and missing footnotes. We note that the EIS was heavily researched and was deemed sufficient twice in its history by the Joint Review Panel. We also note that the fragmentation was assessed in the EIS, specifically in change in wildlife habitat fragmentation provided in reference, if you'll bear with me, 727, section 6.2.7.6.4. We also detailed proposed accommodations in response to one of the IRs, IR 2-6, provided in reference 757. We've heard the comments today and will work to address those comments in further presentations and as filed in the economic session, socioeconomic session. Second, Generation has assessed project emissions in relation to greenhouse gases according to the applicable greenhouse gas regulations. While emissions are expressed from any industrial facility where burning of fossil fuels are required, however, these emissions are considered to be not significant. The project will produce metals that are necessary for the energy transition and will create jobs in the town of Marathon and the region. We also acknowledge concerns with the potential effects of the accommodations complex with respect to temporary workers and the concern with respect to women specifically. We have considered this in the socioeconomic analysis and will further discuss that in the socioeconomic session as well. Finally, Generation is confident in the EIS conclusions, including the fact that there are no significant adverse effects with respect to the VEX, including aquatic environment and socioeconomics. We heard from Mr. Zakurski from the Thunder Bay Community Economic Development Commission and thank him for his comments relating to the Thunder Bay support and the town for the town of Marathon and the First Nation communities. We agree that this project can be a gold, or as I said, PGM star, as an example moving forward with local and regional economic benefits. Next, we heard from Ms. Robinson from the Thunder Bay Chamber of Commerce. She confirmed that the Marathon project will result in significant investment and jobs for companies within the Thunder Bay and across Northwestern Ontario. Thank you again very much for expressing support and the excitement for the project. We look forward to working with Thunder Bay going ahead on the project. And then we heard from Ms. Blay and Dr. Peterson for the Environment North, excuse me. Gen PGM will carefully consider the Environment North's comments. Gen PGM believe that it has satisfied the relevant requirements of SIA 2012 and the relevant guidelines with respect to climate considerations. However, Gen PGM will respond to the legal interpretation points made by Environment North during its legal closing submission. Gen PGM also notes that the metals produced by the mine are necessary for hybrid and, in subsequent terms, electric vehicles, which are essential for increasing sustainability and support of the energy transition going ahead. We look forward to hearing input from all the stakeholders. Gen PGM values a collaboration and successful discussions today, and we're eager to provide more information where we can to allow everybody to have a fulsome understanding of the project. With that, Madam Chair, we look forward to the purpose and alternative means tomorrow, and we'll see you then.
Thank you very much, Mr. Annual, and thank you once again to all the participants. As we mentioned, we are going to end proceedings today now, and we will reconvene tomorrow at 9 o'clock, and we look forward to the ongoing participation. Thanks to all of you today.